Good evening and welcome to another Dhamma talk here with Empty Cloud Monastery. So we'll start with a period of meditation. So please go ahead and get in a meditation position, taking a couple minutes to carefully adjust your posture, making sure you're sitting in a stable, balanced, upright position. You can take a few long, slow, deep breaths. With each breath, letting your body and mind relax. Bringing a slight smile to your lips. And forget about the past and forget about the future. Just bringing all of your attention to the present moment. And settling your mind in the body. Choosing a place in the body to center your attention. Bringing the mind to complete stillness, centered in the body. Clearly feeling your body and enjoying the experience, enjoying the intensity and clarity of directly knowing your own body, directly feeling this physical experience. Letting the mind be relaxed and gentle, yet alert and persistent. devoting every moment to the meditation. As the mind becomes settled and sharp, pay attention to sensations of body and mind, recognizing that they're constantly changing. There's nothing solid anywhere in the body, nothing stable anywhere in the mind. Everything is constantly changing, like a swirling cloud of fog. Like a swirling array of sparks flashing on and off. Like a shimmering mirage. You can stretch a little bit. Taking a few moments to ease any tension in the body. You can adjust your posture. So at this time I'll give a short Dhamma talk and then take any questions that you have. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddhas. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. So, here at the monastery, we've been in meditation retreat for the past 6 days. And as a result, my mind is pretty peaceful. I don't actually really want to talk. I don't really have much I want to say. But nonetheless, it's important to share a few words of Dhamma. And one of the reasons why it's good to talk about Dhamma is because in order to talk about Dhamma, it's necessary to reflect upon it within your own mind. When you reflect upon it, then you come to a deeper understanding of it. And particularly trying to figure out how to express the Dhamma in words, words that other people can understand, then requires one to think more deeply about it. And often it can lead to surprising realizations. So the process of trying to explain Dhamma concepts to other people has on many occasions led to me getting a deeper understanding of that same concept. So it's interesting that the Buddha mentions in several places in the Suttas, he mentions that one of the causes for the arising of wisdom is discussing the Dhamma. So not necessarily just passively absorbing a Dhamma talk, though of course that's helpful. It's very helpful to listen to Dhamma talks. But also the process of discussing the Dhamma. So actually talking with another person, having some dialogue in a back and forth exchange of thoughts and ideas and reflections and perspectives. And of course, it's good to do this with somebody who is more knowledgeable or more well-practiced than you. But even having Dhamma discussion with somebody who's on a similar level of understanding or even a lower level of understanding than your own, even that can be of great benefit because it does get one thinking deeply about the Dhamma, reflecting deeply on the Dhamma. And as I mentioned a moment ago, trying to put the Dhamma into words that can be communicated to others. That process of thinking about the Dhamma in a tangible, verbal way can lead us to a deeper realization, a deeper understanding. So it is really worth it. It's really worth taking the time to periodically have conversations about the Dhamma with other practitioners. And another very important element of Dhamma discussion is that it can challenge our opinions. So often we start with particular opinions and viewpoints. We think we already know the way things are. We've got it all figured out. And we start to have a discussion about the Dhamma with someone. And at some point it comes out that their opinion is different from ours. Maybe they have a slightly different viewpoint on a certain point of Dhamma, or even a radically different viewpoint. And through that conversation and discussion, one can start to illuminate the different sides of the issue, which can help one come to a deeper understanding of the Dhamma. And it is very important to enter into any Dhamma discussion. It's very important to have a genuine willingness to let go of your own opinions. It's very important to be willing to change your own opinions, to change your mind about things. So the point of a Dhamma discussion is not to convince the other person that you are right. The point of a Dhamma discussion is not to communicate your own opinions, though that's, of course, part of what we're doing. The point of a Dhamma discussion is not to affirm your superiority. The point of a Dhamma discussion is not to convince other people how smart you are. The point of a Dhamma discussion is to help you come to a deeper understanding of the Dhamma. The point of a Dhamma discussion is to help you come to a clearer understanding of the truth. And I'm going to let you in on a painful little secret. If you're not fully enlightened, then that means your views are wrong. So you better be willing to let go of them, because something in there is not quite right. Might be slightly wrong, or it might be extremely wrong. And hopefully we'll find out sooner or later, so that it can be adjusted and fixed. But the point is that if you are not willing to change your own opinions, then you will never attain enlightenment. If you think you've already got all the answers, well, you clearly don't, because if you had all the answers, you would be enlightened by now. So clearly something's still not quite right in there. So there's basically one of two scenarios. Either one, you're fully enlightened, in which case, congratulations, I want to listen to your Dhamma talks. Or two, you're not fully enlightened, which means your views are wrong. So odds are it's not scenario number one. Odds are it's scenario number two, which means that you still have some element of wrong view. This includes me, by the way. I don't like to openly admit it, but I've definitely got at least a little bit of wrong view floating around in this mind somewhere, or else I would be enlightened by now. So if we've got a little bit of wrong view, or possibly a lot of wrong view, then part of the path to awakening is the willingness to let go of our views, the willingness to let go of our opinions, the willingness to change our mind. So this starts with accepting the possibility that we might be wrong about something. So I've had to face this many, many times over the years. So I've been practicing Buddhism now for just under 20 years, so more than half my life. Most of that time I've been a monk. And over the course of that 20 years, I've had to change my opinions countless times. Countless times I've had to change my mind about something. I've had to alter my viewpoints. Countless times I thought I understood something about the Dhamma, but through the course of study, or the course of listening, or the course of conversation, or sometimes the course of speaking, I've come to the realization that my understanding of Dhamma was wrong. That there was something wrong which I had to change. Actually, it's quite remarkable when this happens while speaking. So while speaking, it's like, well, because of A, therefore B, therefore D. Whoa, that's actually not right. I just said something that's not right. So even in the course of explaining something, there can sometimes come the realization that we're actually not correct. And we need to reconsider. We need to reconsider what we're saying. Reconsider if maybe our thoughts are not quite in line with the Dhamma. If maybe our viewpoints need to be straightened out and corrected a bit. And this can be very painful. The process of straightening out our views can be very painful. And the reason it's painful is because we have so much self-identity connected to our opinions. We think these are my opinions. They're me. They're who I am. They're what define me. They're what makes me different from other people. And guess what? That's true. To be specific, they're what make you different from an enlightened person. Your opinions are what make you different from the Buddha. Is that really what you want to hold on to? Is that the kind of specialness and uniqueness you want to have? The specialness of being unenlightened? It's not very special, by the way. The uniqueness of your unique position of delusion, your unique status of suffering, not very unique, by the way. It's actually common as dirt. It's just different varieties of dirt, different varieties of filth. It's like, well, choose your filth. It's like, well, I'll take the chocolate flavored filth. Thank you. It's still filth. So this is recognizing. It's recognizing that just because we have a self-identity doesn't mean it's worth holding on to. Just because we have a sense of me doesn't mean it's worth holding on to. Just because we have an opinion doesn't mean it's worth holding on to. I remember one time, many years ago, I was having an argument with my brother, which I mostly don't do anymore because I realized it's pointless. When I was having an argument with my brother, and at one point, after we'd been talking for a while, my brother, he just stopped and he was like, it's really frustrating to have a discussion with you. And I was like, oh, why is that? And he's like, because you're not consistent. And I'm like, oh, I'm not consistent? And he's like, yeah, you keep changing your opinions about things. You keep changing your standpoints. And it's like, yeah? Is that a problem? Isn't that what we're trying to do? Aren't we trying to get some deeper understanding? And in that moment, I realized that his idea of a conversation was very different from mine. His idea of a conversation was that at the beginning, each person clearly establishes their unmoving, unshakable, unchangeable stance, and then people then spend the rest of the time communicating the details and differences of their unmoving, unchangeable stances. And what was frustrating him so much was that I kept changing my stance. But to me, it made perfect sense. As the conversation continued, I was gathering more information. And as I gathered more information, then that meant I needed to adjust my stance. Because that information was constantly informing the basis of my standpoint. As you gather more information, then naturally your opinions are liable to shift and change. That's normal. In fact, that's good. Actually, it's not normal. In fact, it's incredibly weird and uncommon, but it's very good. And so it's all the more important to do this when we're discussing the Dhamma, when we're studying the Dhamma, when we're learning the Dhamma. It's extremely important to start with the recognition that we not only probably have some misunderstandings about the Dhamma, we definitely have some misunderstandings about the Dhamma, which means not only should we be willing to change our opinions and viewpoints, we should be eager to change our opinions and viewpoints if we encounter good reason to do so. So, I'm not really sure I have much of a point here. Except I really do want to get across this point that we need to be willing to constantly reevaluate what we think is the Dhamma, and to constantly reevaluate our opinions and beliefs about Dhamma. And actually, the longer somebody is Buddhist, the more they learn, the more they study, the more practice one gets. Often what happens, one becomes increasingly rigid in one's opinions. One becomes increasingly convinced of the correctness of one's own opinions. So it's very important to watch out for this risk. There is this danger that as time goes by, we become increasingly stuck in our own views. So it's important to constantly re-examine what are we stuck on? What are we not willing to consider differently? And to actually actively seek out people with different opinions and have conversations with them on the subject. So an example of this, so one of the ongoing debates in Buddhist circles is around the topic of karma. Is everything we experience the result of karma? Or is some of what we experience the result of karma and some of it not the result of karma? So there's one of these ongoing debates. And for many years, I was quite solidly in the not everything is karma camp. And then one day I was having a conversation with a certain senior monk, and I expressed my viewpoint, my opinion that not everything was the result of karma. And she just turns and looks at me with this quizzical expression, as though I'd said something unbelievably childish and absurd. And she says, well, of course everything is the result of karma. And in that moment, I had this thought of like, wait a minute, what if I've actually been wrong about this all these years? What if my firmly held opinion, which I'm so convinced is true, what if it's actually wrong? So I'm talking to somebody who's many years my senior, someone who's been a monk much longer than me, who's been practicing much more than I have, studied much more than I have, and they have a different opinion than me. What if my opinion is wrong? And then I started reflecting deeply, and through the course of further conversation, my opinion changed. And I was like, oh, maybe she's right. Maybe everything we experience is the result of karma. How does this view feel? Does this view feel more in line with Dhamma? Does this feel closer to the essence of what the Buddha was teaching? And I came to the conclusion, yes. That viewpoint is closer to the Dhamma. Nonetheless, there continue to be many Buddhist teachers in the world who have the view not everything is karma. And there continue to be many Buddhist teachers in the world that have the view that everything is karma. So it's really delightful to have these conversations, because through the course of these conversations, our understanding becomes deeper and clearer. But these conversations are only fruitful if we're willing to have a flexible, fluid, adaptable view. If we're willing to allow our opinions and perspectives to shift and change over the course of a conversation, over the course of a discussion, then then Dhamma discussion is a valuable tool for developing insight, a valuable tool for developing wisdom. And of course, our views are influenced by many things. They're influenced by what we read. So of course, it's very important to read the suttas. So to read all of the suttas, front to back, at least once. So it's important that the primary influence on our views be from the suttas. The suttas are the closest thing to the Buddha's words that we can get these days. So it's very important that that be the primary influence on our views. But our views are influenced by many other things. They're influenced by the teachers that we listen to, hopefully Buddhist teachers. They're influenced by the media that we're exposed to. So if you watch a lot of non-Buddhist media, a lot of non-Buddhist information, then that will tend to subtly shift your views. So an example of this, many years ago, there was a young lady who pointed out that one of the dominant viewpoints, which is constantly being communicated through virtually every form of entertainment, is that the highest form of happiness is through romantic relationships. And I never thought about it in such blunt terms until she pointed it out. She was like, it's everywhere. Everywhere you look, this is what's being said to you. Sometimes blatantly, sometimes this is explicitly what's being said directly. But very often it's implied. It's implied by the behavior of characters in movies. It's implied by the choices that people make in books. It's implied by what news stories are presented and how the people in the news stories are spoken about. Constantly there's presented this idea that the most important thing in life is romantic relationships, and the highest form of happiness comes through romantic relationships. So the reason I bring this up is because if we're constantly exposing ourselves to popular entertainment, then that viewpoint is going to work itself into our mind. Even if we also study the Dhamma, we might find that we're actually running with two opposing sets of viewpoints in the mind. So our Dhamma views and our non-Dhamma views. And even though these can be different or even opposite to each other, we tend to go through life with these two opposing sets of views, both running in the mind, both functional in the mind, and both influencing our decisions. So even though through our Dhamma mind, we know that romantic relationships are not the highest form of happiness, and in fact, they're not particularly important at all. Nonetheless, our non-Dhamma mind keeps constantly spurring us to seek out romantic relationships and to place huge importance on them and to make incredible sacrifices for the sake of romantic relationships. We're used to hearing these idioms of like, all you need is love. The most important thing is love. And we hear these so often that we believe them. They become the deepest layer of our conditioning. So it's important to really consider, what are we feeding our mind? What views are we feeding our mind? So the Buddha talks about the 4 kinds of food. So the first kind of food is, of course, physical food, what you feed your body. But the other 3 kinds of food are different kinds of mental food, what we feed our mind. So it's very important to consider what we feed our mind. So staying away from feeding our mind information which is contrary to Dhamma. Constantly putting into our mind things which glorify sex and violence and acquisition and wealth. Trying to avoid constantly exposing ourselves to non-Dhamma or even anti-Dhamma material and information, because that will tend to create a layer of wrong view in the mind, which later on we're going to have to dig in and pull out. Now, later on, we're going to have to excavate all of that non-Dhamma, anti-Dhamma material from the mind. So you might as well just not put it in there in the first place. It saves us a lot of work and hassle later on. But that's also something that can come out through conversation, through discussion. Again, I've had a number of times when in the course of a Dhamma conversation, either I or the other person just offhand makes one of these remarks that outside of Buddhist circles would be a perfectly normal thing to say. So outside of a Dhamma discussion, it would be perfectly normal to say these sorts of things. And the other person is just like, that doesn't sound like Dhamma to me. That doesn't sound quite correct. Like I remember one time someone was talking about self-defense, and this was many years ago, and I just made the comment of like, well, of course everyone has a right to kill in self-defense. And I was just like, and the other person was like, excuse me, is that really a Buddhist thing to say? And I was like, oh my, wow, what did I just say? And what does that imply about what I believe on a subconscious level? And where did that belief come from? Because it's clearly not from the Buddha. And do I really want to keep holding on to that kind of belief? So this is another point where Dhamma discussion is incredibly valuable, is it can help us to start to excavate these deep layers of non-Dhamma, even anti-Dhamma conditioning in the mind. It can start to reveal those to us so that we can dig them out, we can alter them, we can remove them. And often if we don't have another person to discuss these things with, we'll never come to the point of realizing and recognizing these layers of wrong view buried in our minds. And this also then leads to another point, which is why many people avoid Dhamma discussions. Maybe they like listening to Dhamma talks. Maybe they even ask questions during Dhamma talks, but they will avoid having an open discussion about Dhamma. I remember a few times when I asked a person a question. I asked them a question about their opinions about Dhamma topics or about meditation practice. And they got really angry, really defensive. I remember one time when a person went on this long, furious rant about how I was invading their privacy by asking these questions. And it's like, well, what are you so afraid of? What are you so afraid of being revealed? If it's fully in line with Dhamma, then you have no fear. You have no fear of revealing the treasures of Dhamma within your own mind. But if you have a fear of uncovering and revealing some of your views, then that's probably a sign that there's something wrong with those views. Probably a sign that they're not quite in line with Dhamma. Or a sign that you're not sure about them. That you're holding on to something that you're actually not sure is real, which is another really good reason to bring it forward. If you're holding on to a viewpoint which you have doubt about, then you shouldn't be holding on to that viewpoint. You should be discussing it to the point where you get some clarity around it. You should be willing to bring it forward and say, I'm not really sure about this. I'm not really sure if it's right or not, if it's true or not. And if you have practices that you're doing, which again, you're not quite sure are correct or not, then absolutely you should be willing to discuss them so that they can be changed. Again, usually the reason why people get defensive around these things is because they're not willing to change. And if you're not willing to change, then you will never attain awakening, and you will continue to suffer in delusion for the rest of eternity. So the point I'm trying to make through all of this is two things. One, Dhamma discussion is a very valuable element of our practice, especially the cultivation of wisdom, cultivation of right view. And Dhamma discussion should be honest. It should be transparent. It should be deep. And the other point I'm trying to make is it is critically important that we be willing to let go of any viewpoint that we have, any opinion that we have. It is absolutely important that we be willing to change our mind about any topic whatsoever. And the reason for this is because we know for sure one thing. And that one thing we know for sure is that we still have wrong view. So, and clearly we don't quite know yet where our wrong views are, or else we would be able to do something about it by ourselves. So it's critically important that we be willing to reveal our wrong views and to alter them, to let go of them, to relinquish them. And there's no shame in this. So some people are hesitant to talk about their views because they're ashamed. They think that it's shameful to reveal their wrong views, but actually it's not. It's a sign of wisdom. Being willing to reveal your wrong views is a sign of wisdom because it shows that you're willing to change your wrong views. If you're willing to bring them forward into the light so that they can be examined and picked apart, so that they can be corrected, well, that's wisdom. And it's the basis of the development of even more wisdom, deeper wisdom. So there's nothing shameful in speaking about your wrong views, as long as you're willing to change them, that is. Then there's nothing to worry about at all. So I think I've been talking for long enough. So at this time, I'd like to go ahead and take some questions. I see there's a few questions showing up. First off, hello to all the people joining in. So hello to Mary, Pravat, Pook, Patricia, Kumu, Scott, Bhante Gyanaratna, good to see you, Bhante. Tora, Gita, Elaine, Sud, Amaranta, Laura, Rick, and Bobby, and Yankee. So welcome. So let's start going through some of these questions. So Scott says, as I practice on and off the cushion, I'm aware of the mind's tendency to proliferate. The proliferations are so distracting and enticing, they give rise to many emotions and mind states. I seek to abandon the proliferations as they arise. I also attempt to direct the mind to Dhamma. The habit of mind is to believe the proliferations. How can I work towards breaking this habit? Samadhi. Samadhi, samadhi, samadhi. Practice samadhi. So the practice of samadhi, first and foremost, is a practice of learning how to still the mind, how to stop the mind from producing a lot of unnecessary noise, how to stop the mind from writing all these stories, how to stop the mind from complicating things. So samadhi practice is very, very helpful in that it helps to break these habits of filling our mind with silly stories all the time. And samadhi practice, it's supported through constant mindfulness. It's supported through the practice of joy, the development of euphoria. It's supported through contentment and renunciation. So the more you pay attention to the present moment, the more you enjoy the present moment, the more content you are with things just the way they are in the present moment, then the less likely you are to start thinking about anything else. The mind proliferates when there's craving in operation. If there's no craving, then the mind will not proliferate. The mind proliferates because it wants something. So if you practice contentment and renunciation, then the mind is not going to be interested in proliferating. So these are my recommendations. Develop very strong samadhi, practice sati all the time, and practice renunciation and contentment. And yes, that does necessitate lifestyle changes. Renunciation is not a thought. Renunciation is something you do with your life. Of course, what you do with your mind is an important part of that, but it's what you do with your life. Then Amaranta says, I get confused about everything we experience as a result of karma, but there is a sutta when the Buddha divides the causes of illnesses and explains that not all illnesses are the result of karma. Yes, I'm fully aware of that sutta. It's the one that constantly gets brought forward by the not everything is karma camp of people. And it's an interesting sutta, mainly because it seems to be saying something directly the opposite of what Buddha says in literally every single other sutta about karma. So all throughout the suttas, we see the Buddha constantly talking about karma and how what we experience is the result of our karma. And then there's one sutta which someone can pull forward and say, well, but this one seems to indicate that some things we experience are not karma. So that's the first thing to keep in mind is the context. So there's many other suttas where the Buddha actually directly says that sickness is the result of karma. So what's going on in this sutta then? What's going on here? So first off, what the Buddha is talking about is he's talking about pain. He's talking specifically about pain and affliction in the body and the different things that can cause it. So the other things he gives as causes of affliction are, for example, eating unhealthy food, not taking care of your body very well. So what is that? That is an action. You are performing the volitional action of not taking care of your body properly. The volitional action of, for example, eating unhealthy food or not exercising properly or overexerting the body. What is volitional action? Volitional action is karma. So the result of that volitional action, aka karma, is pain/illness arising in the body. So clearly the Buddha is not saying that something is happening apart from karma. Rather, he's pointing out that there are things we do which we don't call karma, but which are nonetheless karma. There are things we do which produce results. So he gives a list of several examples along these lines, and every one of them you can see is an action that we take, which produces a result. Therefore, it's karma. And he also gives the example of karma as a direct cause of pain. So pain arising directly as the result of karma. So an example of this might be somebody who is born with chronic pain, and they have chronic pain their entire life, and that chronic pain doesn't seem to have any medical cause. So there are people like this. They have some kind of chronic pain which doesn't seem to have any medical cause whatsoever. That would be an example of pain as the direct result of karma. The other examples the Buddha gives in that sutta appear to be pain as an indirect result of karma. In other words, karma produces an effect, and that effect then causes pain. So it's still ultimately pointing back to karma as the cause of what's going on. So my understanding of that sutta is that in that sutta, the Buddha is saying that karma often takes place through a multiple step process in producing a result. So he's saying it's not correct that all pain is the direct result of only karma, but rather the choices we make create conditions, and those conditions can produce pain. But nonetheless, it still ultimately comes back to karma. That sutta also is best taken together with two other suttas, which kind of flesh out a complete picture of the different modes of karma operating. I've given talks on this in the past, so I'm not going to go into detail on it now. But suffice to say, I'm fully aware of that sutta. And when taken within the context of all the other suttas about karma, it becomes clear that that sutta is not saying that illness can be caused randomly and spontaneously with no reason whatsoever, but rather that it is still ultimately the result of our past actions. Next, Bobby says, I would say romantic love is a little important. Without it, there would be no more bodhisattvas or Buddhas, at least not Earth. What would you say? Okay, sure. Yeah. Suffering is also important in that sense, because without suffering, there would be no bodhisattvas and no Buddhas. Misery, anguish, torment, disaster, these also are important, because without them, there would be no bodhisattvas and no Buddhas. Sansara is important, because without it, there would be no bodhisattvas and no Buddhas. Nonetheless, samsara is still a horrible, horrible thing, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. So I should clarify, I'm not saying that romantic love is entirely awful. It's not. There's actually many very wholesome things about it. For people who are not celibate, romantic relationships can actually be a very powerful way of developing wholesome states of mind. So learning how to genuinely care about another person, to cultivate real unconditional love for another person, to learn consideration and kindness towards another person, These are ways you can use a romantic relationship to cultivate wholesome states of mind. They're also great for developing patience and equanimity and non-attachment. So if you use a romantic relationship as a vessel for Dhamma practice, then yeah, you can develop much that is wholesome in that way. Then Kumo says, what about the explanation that karma is only volitional action? Is the Pali stanza Chetanahang bhikkhave kamang vadami in any of the suttas? Yeah. Yeah, so karma is volitional action. What other kind of action could there be? It says unintentional action. But even then, what's going on there? One is choosing to have a lack of mindfulness. One is choosing to be negligent. So that also is a choice. That's also a volition. That's also karma. The choice to be negligent is a choice. So we need to watch out for the tendency to make excuses for our own misconduct. And Sud asks, the world only knows sensual pleasures. For someone exposed to the Dhamma in lay life, others seem crazy. Yet to maintain relationship, one has to engage in these activities, such as watching movies and going to Disney World and so on. What are your thoughts regarding this? First off, you don't have to engage in those activities if you don't want to. Just don't engage in them. And if other people want to, you can tell them, oh, go on ahead, have fun, but I'm not going to participate. And some people, they'll start to realize that their connection with you is solely through silly things. And one of two things will happen. Either they'll seek more profound ways of connecting with you, spiritual ways of connecting with you. That's the optimal. Or they'll just not want to be around you anymore. That's also pretty darn good, because then they're not having a bad influence on you anymore. Better example of this, for example, is drinking alcohol. I've known a number of people who, when they give up drinking alcohol, they realize how many of their friends will only hang out with people who drink. And the way they discover this is because suddenly a lot of their friends don't want to talk to them anymore, don't want to hang out with them anymore. And that's an incredible realization when you realize that the person doesn't actually like you. They like you drinking alcohol. Isn't that strange? Well, if they only like people drinking alcohol, then they can go like somebody else. That's good, because then they're not having a bad influence on you anymore. So of course, alcohol is a very, very major example. By comparison, say watching a movie once in a while is not such a big deal. It's still not great. It's better just to not watch movies at all, of course. But once in a while, watching a movie is not anywhere near as harmful as getting drunk every day, for example. But nonetheless, if you're just like, yeah, I don't watch movies, it's part of my spiritual practice to not watch movies, a lot of people will respect that. And they'll go on watching movies without you, but they'll still be your friend and they'll still connect with you in other ways. And I have to say, if somebody only wants to be your friend on the sole condition that you watch movies together, what a shallow, pathetic friendship. I don't want that kind of friendships in my life. And neither should you if you're serious about the Dhamma. But it's also quite common, by the way, as I mentioned in a previous talk, that we practice Dhamma bit by bit. So you're not expected to give up everything all at once. Rather, it's quite normal to gradually develop a practice of Dhamma over the course of actually many, many lifetimes. So it's actually normal that you'll still be doing a few unproductive, possibly even unwholesome things. That's normal, while also developing your Dhamma practice. Again, this is quite common. But the hope is that over time, you'll reduce the unwholesome activities and increase the Dhamma activities. Until eventually, someday you attain awakening. Possibly in this life, probably in a future life. So the important thing is that we're always making upward progress. That's the important thing. Yankee Apple says, "Thank you for your no-nonsense talks." I'm happy to hear you say that. Sometimes I think I come on too strong, a little too forceful. In fact, I've had people tell me that my talks are too intense. But yeah, what can I say? This is the only way I know how to talk. Bobby asks, would it be best for the universe for all creatures to reach enlightenment at one point, so much so that no living beings will ever come to be again? I have some bad news for you, Bobby. Sansara has always existed and will always exist. Sansara will never cease to exist. And it is impossible for all beings to attain awakening. It's impossible. There have always been unawakened beings, and there always will be unawakened beings. That's just the way reality works. The question is, are you going to be one of them? That's the question. Sud asks, can one pray to devas to help in practicing the Dhamma, like trying to avoid harmful conditions, stressful conditions, etc.? Yes, yeah, you can pray to devas and ask them to help you. There are devas who are what we call Dharma protectors. Most of them are Buddhists, so Buddhist devas, and they like to help out Buddhist humans. They pay attention to us and give us a hand from time to time. They're there, and if you ask for help, sometimes they help you. Sometimes they don't, but the process of asking a deva for help in your practice can strengthen your own resolve. It can strengthen your own commitment to Dhamma practice and strengthen your motivation in Dhamma practice. So this is not something I do commonly these days, but in the past, there's been times when I was having a really hard time, and I would do this. I would pray to a bodhisattva or a deva and ask for some help. And I don't know whether they helped me or not, but I know that the process of praying and asking for help, I know that process helped me. So whether the help was from the act itself or whether it was the help from an external being, I'm not sure. But I do know that it helped. Kumo says, following up on the question about karma, so even though we think it is not volitional, if we trace back the event, there is volition somewhere. I get it now. Thank you. Yes, one more into the everything karma camp. Hallelujah. Check. Okay. D. Tissera says, could you explain what Nirodha Samapati is? Is it only arhants who will experience this? So Nirodha Samapati is another word for Sanya Vedayata Nirodha, the cessation of perception and feeling, which is a advanced form of samadhi, which is accessible for somebody who has completely removed all sensual desire from the mind. So this means it's accessible to a non-returner or an arhat, but not to anybody below the stage of non-returner. So an anagami, a non-returner, or an arahat can experience Nirodha Samapati. So Nirodha Samapati, again, it's called the cessation of perception and feeling. So it's a state which is said to be the closest one can get to nibbana while still being a living sentient being. So it's the closest you can get within samsara. It's the closest you can get to experiencing nibbana. So it's a state where most of what makes up our personal individual existence temporarily ceases, temporarily disappears. And yet, nonetheless, you're still alive. So it's a extraordinarily subtle and refined state of mind. And I've never really given much thought to it because I'm not a non-returner, so I can't experience this state of mind. And once I'm a non-returner, I'm probably not going to care so much because I know I'm extremely close to awakening at that point. So I've never really given much thought to it, to be honest. I don't really see the point in spending too much time thinking about Nirodha Samapatti. Bobby asks, how can Sansara be permanent if everything is impermanent? You're missing the point. Okay, Dan says, along that line, cessation of perception and feeling, as that translation, could it be a common experience? No, it is not a common experience. As I mentioned, this is something which is only experienced by non-returners and arhats. What ordinary people can have is moments of unconsciousness, which is not the same. It's more, unconsciousness is more, there's a period of time where our sensory fields are not functioning. So it's not the same as Nirodha Samapatti. But again, I've never really given much thought to Nirodha Samapatti because if you're not a non-returner, then it's out of your reach. So if you really want to learn more about Nirodha Samapatti, your primary purpose should be becoming a non-returner. Then once you're a non-returner, then if you want to try to get into this state of samadhi, go right ahead. Might be useful. But yeah, there's a relatively common trend of unawakened people who have not had any state of awakening, learning about these very subtle, refined mind states that awakened beings have, and then thinking that they're experiencing those mind states. And it's really missing the point. It's like if you're not even a stream enterer, how could you possibly have anything close to Nirodha Samapatti? It's just not possible. So you start where you are and work with the conditions you have. So that's the last of the questions. Anything from the residents? No? Okay. So we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.